Welcome, everyone. This is Mayor Steve Haggerty. You are joining our fifth in a series of discussions about policing in Evanston. Today, we're going to be talking about the complaint process here in Evanston against officers or any kind of service that you receive from the police department and how that works. This series is geared towards establishing a foundation of knowledge in the community about various operations of our police department. We've talked about use of force, we've talked about training, and today, again, we're going to talk about the complaint process. This is our fifth one. We are working on adding additional topics to this series, and we'll come out and post that. My hope is that they'll continue to be at noon on Mondays. Today, I'm pleased to have with us several guests, some of whom you're familiar with. Our Chief of Police, Demetrius Cook, is with us. He is in the center right there. We have with him to his right, Commander Jody Hart, who used to be in charge of the Office of Professional Services. Is that what the S stands for?
It's the Office of Professional Standards.
Standards, excuse me. So Office of Professional Standards used to be. Now he's the commander for the night time shift, midnight shift really, at the police department. To Chief Cook's left is Sergeant Warnick. Sergeant Warnick is now overseeing the Office of Professional Standards. We also have with us Matthew Mitchell. Matthew is an attorney and a resident here in Evanston, and he was the chair of the Citizen Police Complaint Assessment Committee. This was a committee that the City Council and I established to take a look at the entire complaint process, to do some best practices research around the country and see what other comparable communities use. And so today I want the listeners and viewers to understand how that committee functioned and what their findings and then their recommendations were to the city. Some of those recommendations may have already been adopted, some may not. Matthew and I talked earlier last week for him to be free to share, anything about that committee with all of you. So where I think I want to start at the beginning is just with a, open-ended question, Chief, or you could give it to Sergeant Warnick, just to describe to our viewers the complaint process at a high level here in Evanston, and then we'll drill down from there. So everybody's aware, this is being broadcast live on Channel 16, which is our local television station, as well as on Facebook Live. If you have questions as we're going through this today, please feel free to put them into the comments. And Patrick Degnan, who's working behind the scenes, will help feed those to me so we can get those questions asked. So Chief, I'll turn it over to you now.
Good afternoon, everybody. Mayor, I'll answer the question on the complaint process. So typically, complaint can come in either through patrol supervisor, it can come in through our office, either online. We have places online through the city website where you can file a complaint. You can do it anonymously, leave us a voicemail. However you leave it, we end up intaking the complaint. We request that or ask that somebody fill out a complaint register form. Once they do that, we will take a look at it. We will gather all the information, follow up on it, speak with the chief and see how, kind of what it falls into, if it's going to stay as a complaint register and if it's going to be a formal complaint. We'll go down that route. Now with a formal complaint, officers do have rights, so we have to follow a certain standard and process per statute. If it's going to be something where a citizen just wants to give us a heads up on something and they don't really want to follow through with it, we'll still investigate it the same way, but the discipline level might not be as great, so that's something that we can just investigate, and then once we take a look at it, we put it back down to that officer's supervisor. They then take a look, do their investigation, review body-worn camera, speak to any witnesses, whatever they need to do to conduct their investigation. At that point, they send it up to their commander. So that first line supervisor is typically a sergeant. They send it up to their commander. Their commander reviews it, gives an opinion, sends it up to the deputy chief, who also reviews it, gives an opinion, and then it goes to the chief. The chief does have the final say as far as discipline at the police department. So once the chief gets it, he ends up giving his review of it and decides the discipline. And then from that point, it comes back to our office where we file it. And then if there's disciplinary action that's given to the officer, we give them what's called a disciplinary action form, and we send that back down through the chain of command.
So there are three supervisors' eyes on the findings and the recommendation for discipline by the time it gets to the chief. You got the supervisor, the commander, and then Chief Cook, correct?
Typically, it depends on which unit. So if it's like say it goes to the traffic unit, there's only one sergeant and then straight to the deputy chief. There's not a commander in that. So you'd have two supervisors. But if it goes to patrol or any of our specialized units like our NET or problem solving, which is the community policing, things like that, it would go to the sergeant typically, and then up to the commander, unless obviously the complaint's on the sergeant, then it would go to the commander level.
You mentioned that officers have certain rights. Can you explain that to us? Because I think there's some people that think, hey, as soon as there's a complaint filed, why don't we all know about it? I mean, why isn't that public? The name of the officer involved and everything else. So could you just talk to us a little about the rights that officers have and where those derive from? Do those derive from labor contracts? Do those derive from state laws?
Yeah, sir, there's a little of both. So we do have to work with labor contracts. So we have to work with FOP contracts to make sure that everything we're doing is following that. But also the police officers we're covered by the Illinois Uniform Police Officers Disciplinary Act, which is UPOTA. And that gives officers certain rights as far as being able to bring an attorney, answering questions. If they answer a question to us, that it's not used against them criminally, things of that nature. And that is Illinois statute.
And what's that act called again? The Uniform what?
The Illinois Uniform Police Officers Disciplinary Act. And we call it UPOTA for short.
Disciplinary Act. Okay.
Yeah, the statute number is 50 ILCS 725.
ILCS what?
725.
725. Okay.
The ILCS 725.
Okay.
And if you just Google that, you can find it.
Gotcha. Thank you, and thank you. Matthew Mitchell just put it up on our Zoom for us. Matt, let's talk a little about the committee and the work that you did. One of the things that Sergeant Warnick just mentioned was, how you can go about filing a complaint if you have one, and I think that was one of the recommendations for changes that came out of your committee. So could you just talk a little about the committee, what the objective and the purpose was, and then just for now talk about this particular recommendation of how a resident can file a complaint.
Thank you. So I was chair of the CPCAC, the Citizen Police Complaint Assessment Committee. We were founded in 2017 by the City Council and the Mayor, and we met from the fall of 2017 through December 2018. There were 9 members of that committee, and I'd love to just shout out their names because they put in a lot of hard work. Karen Courtwright, Jared Davis, Joy Anissa Russell, Peter DeMuth, Jeff Parker, Randy Foreman, D. Vincent Thomas, and Maggie Smith, and myself. So 9 community members. And what we did was do an independent review of the process of the investigation, of the current city process for how those complaints kind of mechanically and bureaucratically work their way through the system. We reached out to community members and stakeholders. We came up with 4 specifically tailored recommendations for the city of Evanston, taking into account specific concerns and specific realities of Evanston. One of the recommendations was regarding the intake. I'd say one of the overall criticisms of the current system is you have police officers investigating police misconduct, and there can be a perception of conflict of interest. So just as an individual, a citizen might not want to pursue an investigation if the police are investigating the police. And right now, how you make a complaint is online or through the police department. So the first recommendation is to have an independent intake process outside of the police department. That is, we envision more of a social worker type role who can explain the process objectively and do the intake objectively, and then forward that complaint to the police department.
Okay, thank you. So prior to this committee being established, the only place you could file a complaint against the police was at the police department, and so that was one of the changes that came about.
That was a recommendation that has not been implemented. Still, the only way to file a complaint is through the police department or through their online intake.
That's not correct.
I don't think that was true, Matt. But let's Chief, do you want to just?
Yeah, that's not correct. I did agree that in order to have more of an intake process that would make the citizens feel better about coming forth complaining, was to decentralize the complaint process. And that was one of the first things we did when I came here. So now, not only can you file a police complaint online, you can also call over to City Hall to the administrative adjudication and file a complaint with Renee over there, or you can file online an anonymous complaint. So we do believe that, and we do understand that people may have concerns or fears about coming into the police department, and that's why we felt that decentralization of the complaint process, as recommended in Mr. Mitchell's deal, was a good thing to do.
Thank you. Can I just add that our recommendations were made in December 2018, and Chief Cook took over as police chief in January 2019. So the recommendations preceded Chief Cook's time as chief.
Yeah,
so I appreciate the additional ways you can do the intake now.
All right. Yep. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mayor, may I add one thing?
Go ahead, Sergeant.
And I know, and we've had it happen, some citizens come in with or lodge a complaint with their alderperson. So that is one way if you feel more comfortable with that. We've had them either come in person or receive a call or an email, and then we look at it through that. So that's another route too that citizens can take where they might have a better relationship with their alderperson.
Okay. And Chief, I'll go to you, Matt, in a second. Chief, I just want to make sure I heard you and everybody else heard you correctly. Did you say that you can file an anonymous complaint as well, so you don't have to have your name?
Yes, you don't have to put your name on a complaint. We will take the allegation and take it as far as we can. And during the investigative process, we may be able to determine who was involved in things of that nature. So, yes, sir, you can file an anonymous complaint. We recommend that if an action of a police officer was done against you, that you come forward. And we don't encourage anonymous complaints, but we will look at it.
Has that always been the case that anybody can file an anonymous complaint? Or is
Yeah.
that
Yeah, you could call here and say, hey, I saw a police officer doing whatever, and we'll look at it.
okay? All right, Matt.
I just wanted to clarify that point is the City of Evanston Police Department's policy is to do more than the minimum required under the law. Under the Uniform Peace Officers Disciplinary Act, if there's a sworn complaint, it triggers a duty by the police department to investigate in a certain way. So some police departments in Illinois will not investigate any anonymous complaint, any complaint that's not sworn. Evanston Police Department does more than that minimum required under the law, but it becomes a separate process. So if there's a sworn complaint, it becomes a departmental inquiry subject to strict statutory investigation. If not, it's called a CR. Is that correct, Chief?
Yeah. It's a DI.
Yeah.
Departmental inquiry.
Yes, sir.
Departmental inquiry. So there's a separate type of investigation. Is that correct?
Yes. But, you know, we put the same zeal in trying to find misconduct, whether it's a DI or a CR. You know, so you got DI all the way up to the extreme of CR. You know, if you call here and you say, make an allegation, I don't want to leave my name, we're going to investigate that with the same veracity as we would any other complaint. And when that leads us down a road, then we can implement the rules, if applicable, to the Eppd Act with a police officer.
Hey, Chief, we received a question from Sharon. Understand that police officers have certain rights under the Uniform Police Officers Disciplinary Act. Can you talk about what protections they have in the current FOP contract?
As far as the FOP contract, as far as the FOP contract, I mean, Eppd is going to trump that. We have to follow Eppd. You know, as far as the contract goes, if it's a formal complaint, there's really nothing in the contract that is going to allow an officer to kind of sidestep Eppd. So the contract, I mean, we do have to follow it, but a lot of that too is with grievances. That stuff's spelled out in the contract. But as far as like rights, the FOP contract is not giving the officer special rights or protections as far as defending themselves on a complaint. And
Does the FOP contract provide guidelines that need to be followed in terms of if an officer breaks this protocol or that protocol or that protocol, this is what the penalty would be or anything like that?
That's all through our policies and procedures here at the police department. And one other thing too, on a formal complaint, an officer does not have an option not to answer a question. They must answer our questions if it's a formal complaint. So, you know, if they come in here, they're subject to discipline if they choose not to answer questions.
And and just for our viewers, I want to be very clear, what's the difference between a formal complaint and a informal complaint, or whatever the opposite of that is?
Sure, typically it's the amount of discipline. So anything over 3 days is going to be a formal complaint. And with that comes certain rights that the officer is afforded. So which is the Eppd, and with the informal complaint, up to 3 days, we're not giving them their notice of investigation, their rights, and that we basically do the investigation and they're handed discipline.
Okay. What are the levels of discipline for officers found to have violated rules, policies, or laws?
Discipline can stem from oral reprimand to a written, to suspension, or even dismissal. So starts at oral and goes up to dismissal from the police department.
And that's based upon the seriousness of the infraction.
So could you give us examples of past incidents where complaints were filed and just at a high level, like here's what the complaint was, and without revealing any officers' names or anything like that, because I know they're protected by personnel laws and everything else, but to give us a sense of the amount of discipline. Because I think what happens sometimes is our residents see something that sure looks like it's not protocol. It goes through the whole process, you review it, and no one really knows at the end of the day, was that officer disciplined or not? And if so, what degree of discipline were they given?
Well, the discipline can come in at a number of levels. Number one, what I look at when we're issuing discipline is the officer's past record with respect to discipline. If he's an officer that has been involved in numerous incidents, when he's issued discipline for a particular infraction, it may not start in a normal sense of progressive discipline. And progressive discipline is what Commander Wright just spoke of. You got an oral, you get a written, then you get disciplinary suspension in terms of punitive action against the officer, or suspension time where money is taken out of his pocket. What I also like to do, that I do in terms of when I issue discipline, I always issue training. So that way, when an officer does that infraction again, I can be a little bit more punitive, because if I discipline you for one thing and then I send you to training on it, if you do that again, it's going to be a little bit more severe discipline. So, everybody is not going to get the same discipline for the same infraction. And that may be based upon prior disciplinary action, whether or not, if we meet and I feel you understand that discipline was necessary. Police officers have a sense when they've done wrong. They know when they have done something wrong. If they wanted to admit they've done something wrong, then I can help them. But outside of that, I can't, and I stick to the standard discipline that would be considered progressive discipline. But an officer with 10 prior infractions, he's not going to get the same as an officer that this may be his first time.
Is like what percentage of the police force has some sort of infraction, of the policy? And let me just say before you answer that, like, we're all human. Everybody makes mistakes. I mean, we're talking police today, but it's no different if it's, public works department, fire department, the engineering department, and all of that. Big difference, right, is, police officers have a lot of responsibility. They carry weapons. If something went terribly wrong, somebody could be seriously hurt or worse. So I'm just curious, like, is that, do we keep those statistics? And the reason that question came to me, Chief, is you said, just as an example, you said, if somebody's got 10 infractions, in their personnel file, and I, of course, went, wow, 10 infractions, that sounds like a lot. Like, it sounds like somebody who doesn't, is making a lot of mistakes. So can you talk to that a little?
Yeah, first I want people to understand that, when you say discipline, it covers everything here. It's not just a citizen complaint. It's everything. It's how you drive a city vehicle. It's whether you're on time for work. It's whether you miss court. It's whether it's your conversation with people. If you're being derogatory in your conversation with people, that could be a source of discipline. So discipline in a police department, it covers a whole spectrum of things outside of citizens police interaction. And so at some point in everybody's career here, you know, an officer may miss court. He may have a vehicle accident in a city vehicle. You know, his uniform may be improper, or he may miss, you know, call in sick too many times within a certain period of time. So when you look at discipline, it covers a whole spectrum of things.
Thank you for clarifying that for me and for others that are listening, because there's, you know, you can get disciplined for different things. One being, you know, citizen complaints against the police if those are validated. We did have a question from Sean who asked, are complaints, so these would be citizen complaints, are complaints against police officers public record? If so, are they available to residents without having to go through the FOIA process?
So our complaint register CRs and our departmental inquiries, the DIs, end up going to now the CPRC, which is the newly formed commission. And the results of that end up going to Human Services. Like tonight, there's a Human Services committee meeting. So those complaints, like the actual dispositions of everything from them, will be talked about at Human Services if one of the Human Service Committee members chooses to ask questions about it.
Right, but a regular resident couldn't just say, hey, I want to see that complaint, or could they?
Well,
So members of the Citizen Police Review Commission get to see all the information unredacted and everything, but can any resident in the city see that?
No.
no.
Sorry.
Okay.
And there's reasons for that. You know, some of this stuff ends up in civil litigation. Some of it ends up in federal court. So we're not making all of that information public.
Right. Thank you. Matt, can you talk about the second recommendation that you had? We talked about the first one in terms of improving intake and giving residents many different options to file a complaint and not having to go to the police department. Give us another recommendation that the committee had.
Sure. The second recommendation was to dissolve the Citizen Police Advisory Committee, was the old Citizen Review Board, and implement a new Citizen Review Board. The previous Citizen Review Board, CPAC, was kind of put together over time in an unplanned manner. Organizationally, it wasn't very sound. What it fits is a review type model. You know, if you look at the best practices, generally there's 3 types of models. The review type model has an outside board, review misconduct complaints, and then usually make a non-binding recommendation. And that is the model in Evanston, where the chief of police has the final disciplinary authority. So the CPAC, so the only thing that a review model does is offer transparency to the process. CPAC did not do a great job of offering transparency because there was a summary of an incident that was never made public, and if there was any video footage, that was held in an executive session. So if you were just watching CPAC meetings, you really couldn't see what was going on. They would never get into the details of the complaint unless there were questions. It wasn't a transparent process. So the recommendation was to create a review board that met that transparency requirement, and the city has created a new committee, the Citizen Police Review Commission, and Mary, you can probably talk to more of the details about that.
Yeah, so thanks for describing that recommendation. So yeah, that committee is comprised of 9 people, It was just appointed and approved. I appointed the members, approved by the city council about a month ago. They just had their very first meeting last week, I believe, or the week before. One part of what they're doing right now is just getting themselves familiar with the different, protocols that the police have. Chief, I don't know if you want to talk more about the work we're doing right now to get that board sort of up to speed, and then when they will start to hear actual complaints as well.
Yes, we met with the board. So what we're doing here at the police department is offering outside expert training on the use of force. We've secured the services of a professor of law enforcement from DuPage, the College of DuPage, who will come in and give the group training on the use of force as defined in the Illinois compiled statutes. And then also we've worked with our partners in Skokie. The Skokie Police Department has graciously allowed us to utilize their Virtua simulator. It's like a $500,000 machine. And you step in and it's a 3D model of a use of force situation. The commission will be given a simulated handgun, and based upon the information they're given, they'll have to make those split-second decisions as it relates to whether I should use force or should I not use force, or should I utilize a lower level of force. So that is part of the training. The use of force training will be an ongoing because we're in the post-George Floyd era now, and a lot of things are going to be changing with respect to use of force. So this is not just a one-time situation where we're going to be training them. We'll be training them as the laws in Illinois change also.
But again, that training, Chief, right now it's an outside third party that's doing that with the board.
Right, and then we're gonna put the third thing we're gonna be doing is putting the candidates or the board members from the committee in a squad car with different police officers, so they can get a feel of what it's like to be in a police car. They're gonna be taught how to review what the wording and letters say when we have video, in-car camera video, or whether it's body camera video. They'll be taught about all of that type of stuff also.
Right, and again, the Citizen Police Review Commission is going to get to see all those materials unredacted so that they can reach a conclusion maybe the same or different than your conclusion, but right? Is that correct?
Yeah, they'll be able to look at all of the video, read the reports and so forth.
Thank you. Matt, did you have something you want to add on that? Yeah, go ahead.
I would like just a clarification from the chief and from you, Mr. Mayor. Are all use of force incidents in the Evanston Police Department departmental inquiries?
No. Yeah, it depends if there's separate investigations. We do a use of force investigation. If there's an allegation or a finding when that use of force investigation is done of improper action, then typically administrative review, which is something that's internal, would be done. If a citizen complained, the force was excessive or something like that, we could open up, we could do a complaint register or a departmental inquiry, depending on the complaint.
And let me explain one other thing with respect to what Sergeant Warnick just said. When we read, when upper management, means deputy chief and above myself, when we read a use of force investigation, we don't necessarily wait on a citizen to come in and complain. I can make a judgment as to whether or not a formal or CR should be taken out just based upon reading the police reports and looking at the body camera video. So we do that on a regular basis. So even if the citizen, and we do have some time where the citizen don't come in, we'll do the CR, we'll contact the citizen and get their perspective on what happened. If they don't want to cooperate, then we'll make it an administrative review and we have issued discipline based on situations like what I'm explaining to you now.
Sure, and then I just want to clarify that those administrative review cases would not go before the Citizen Police Review Commission.
Correct.
That's
Correct.
correct, yes.
Well,
But any use of force here in Evanston is reviewed. And that was mentioned absolutely clearly at the last use of force session that we had as well. So thank you. We had a question from Carolyn. At what point do citizens who file a complaint against a police officer get a formal response from EPD regarding the outcome of their complaint?
So as far as a formal letter, that would be after CPAC or now the CPRC, and prior to it going to the Human Services Committee. So that way they know what the outcome is. We send it certified mail. Typically we'll be in touch with the complainant throughout the process, but this way we send it certified mail and they know when the meeting is going to be. So if they would like to go to HSC or at this point virtually attend, they can address the committee.
Okay, so when Citizen Police Review Commission finishes, that's when a letter goes to the complainant, says this is the findings and disposition of this. It's now going to go to the Human Services Committee, which is the elected representatives of this city. So of the city council, so the person can go there if they want to object or make a statement.
Yes,
Okay, all right. Matt, why don't you take us through the a third recommendation that the committee had?
third recommendation was to create a mediation program. It's a common program used by police departments in the United States over the last 20 years. It's considered a best practice. One of the things that happens regularly is there's a complaint, there's an investigation, and the police department finds that there's not a rule violation. The police officer was following the rules, but there was still a bad interaction. And probably if you asked anybody involved, they would agree it was a bad interaction. This mediation program is for those cases where police officers and citizens can, work out their differences person to person, explain, maybe apologize. The idea is to create more personal relationships in disputes, in conflict, as opposed to strictly rule violations. When the whole complaint process, you're only looking at whether the police officer violated the policy manual. There's times where they're following the policy, but the outcome is still not a good outcome. And the mediation program was an idea to address that.
We haven't, to my knowledge, Matt, and correct me if you know differently, we haven't adopted the mediation program approach.
No.
Right. Okay. All right. Chief, I don't know if you want to chime in on any of that, on that recommendation.
Yeah, I understand where Matt, where he's coming from with that recommendation, but we can't force a police officer to do mediation on a disciplinary issue. Either we're going to discipline the police officer, or if we find that there were no rule violations, we can't make him apologize because there was a bad, a perception of a bad incident with a citizen. That is my job, to invite the citizen in, try to explain what happened, and then which I have done it numerous occasions, just apologize for someone even having to come into the police station and make a complaint. We also utilize our problem-solving team to go into communities where it was a perception that the police officer did something wrong. I just got one the other day where the residents saying that I had too many white cops in the neighborhood. I need to get the white cops out of this neighborhood. And I have to go in behind that and explain to people the reason why police officers are there, and it may not be to their liking. That is something that we don't do with the police officers. We looked at the recommendation when we did it. We got a conversation with the union about that, and they had an issue with police officers mediating a deal with a citizen that enforced it, that had them, that could have had them invoke their UPOTA rights under that. So we did look at that, Commander Leaks, Commander Hart, and myself, and that was something that the union felt was counterproductive.
Right. And I know this resident, and I know Chief, right, and you know some of the residents too, who feel like it would actually be really productive, right? Like with certain incidents where maybe policy wasn't broken, like Matt said, but you know, a conversation between the different parties could help, you know, heal a traumatic event.
Yeah. Right. And, you know, we trying to do that every day, you know, in our community policing efforts. You know, what we're working on doing here in terms of relationships is not just have one unit that pushes out community policing. It shouldn't just be the responsibility of the problem-solving team to push out problem-solving in terms of addressing issues or crime prevention or any of those type relationship building in a neighborhood. So we're trying to push this down to the grassroots level here with the patrolmen, so that when these encounters happen, hopefully the police officer and the citizen will know each other and be able to talk it out.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk a little about the actual number of complaints. So we've talked about some of the process, the complaint process. How many complaints, either in 2019 or if you have the data for 2020, have we received? And can you share with our viewers, you know, what categories those complaints fall into? And I imagine there's different categories.
Okay. I'll start off while he looks. For use of force investigations, last year, 2019, we had 35. Whereas in 2018, we had 27. Administrative reviews, we had 59, whereas in 2018, we had 41. When you look at the use of force, we have 14 weaponless incidents. We had 7 non-impact controls. We had 11 allegations of injury. We had 1 chemical that was with chemical mace. We had 1 of those. And we had 12 taser deployments. And that was for 2019. For CR, he'll go in.
Okay. And is the citizen complaint always the CR?
Yes.
Okay.
So this, I just want to clarify with the complaints. So there's formal and informal complaints, and then formal and informal investigations. So a CR comes in, it's a complaint register. That's a form you can fill out online. That's the form you can get from us. And that's for it to be formal. We have the complainant come in, we meet with them, and then we have it notarized. From there, we review it, and the chief decides if this is going to be a formal or informal investigation, meaning the amount of discipline attached to it. if it's something, even though they came in and did the complaint, it might not be egregious enough for it to be over 3 days. So at that point, it'd be an informal investigation. Now, if someone came in, say they filled the form out and they just left it at the desk, at our service desk, and it made its way up to our office, and we review it, and we call them and they say, look, I don't want to come back in. I just want you to investigate it. We would make that a departmental inquiry. What we would do, though, is investigate it the same, as the chief said before. We would do the same amount of work on it. It would not take away what we do. And the investigation could still end up being a formal investigation leading to more than 3 days, 3 or more days of discipline. So just because the citizen didn't want to follow through with it, if we review it and do find that there is something there, we will proceed with it as a formal investigation versus informal.
And whether it's a CR or a DI, it goes to the Citizen Police Review Commission.
Yes, those two go to the citizen.
But many of the others that the chief talked about, where he rattled off at the beginning, use of force and all of that, those are reviews that you do, but those aren't, in response necessarily to complaints. That's just
those are not citizen complaints. So those use of force is not a citizen complaint. It's an officer using force to effect an arrest.
But it could also be a citizen complaint. I mean, I could complain and say he should have pulled his weapon on.
Well, then it becomes either a CR or a DI. So then it would go. So if there is, or we also review it and it becomes an administrative review, which is internal. And those do not go to the Citizen Review Commission because they're not citizen complaints. They're internal complaints that are started by a supervisor.
Right. But the actual citizen complaints, okay, that are filed a year, I want to give our viewers a sense of how many of those are filed here.
Sure. So for 2019, we had 12 complaint registers, so the CRs.
What was that in 2018?
2018. One second here.
I think it was 3. 2018, we had 3. 2019, we had 12.
And we had 12 in 20. Okay, 3 in 2018, 12 in 2019. How many so far in 2020?
1.
Just 1. Okay.
And I think when a lot of the increase can be attributed to people feeling more comfortable and coming into the police department, filing a complaint. I like to take credit for that. I think that, if you make people feel comfortable or they have a sense of trust in the police department, that they'll come in and file a complaint. And we go back with, you can come in. We had just a guy come in and wanted to complain on an incident that happened 2 years ago. We take it. And we go back and we try to find the data to substantiate his claim or disprove his claim. So we do also do that also.
All right. Well, I mean, I think people, as long as they feel like there's no retaliation for complaining or anything like that, which becomes a culture, of an organization, then they're going to be open to, filing a complaint, which should always be viewed as, if we did something wrong, making sure that person or group of people are disciplined, but B, making our organization better. Matt, you want to add something to this conversation?
One of the things that the committee found is that there's a low number of complaints for the size of Evanston and the size of the police force and the size of or the amount of interactions between police and citizens. We don't have a judgment on why. In 2011, there were 77 total complaints. In 2012, 73 total complaints. And then since 2016, those numbers have been all very low, under 20. And we don't have a reason for why the complaint process isn't used more often.
Well, I think with the advent of body cameras, officers are doing what they're supposed to do more. And that's be courteous to the citizen control their inner bias and do a good job. Because, you know, we do audits on our body camera video. Each supervisor on each shift looks at a percentage of his shift's video, and we're gonna find video that either we're gonna take action on because we felt it was necessary for the efficiency of the department, or we're gonna utilize that video for training purposes, to train other officers on whether or not this is how you approach a car. For instance, I'm Officer Cook with the Evanston Police Department. The reason I stopped you, you were doing 25 and a 30. May I please look at your driver's license and insurance? When officers do that, we utilize that for training purposes. When they do something egregious, we have ways of not ostracizing a police officer by blocking his face out, and we'll utilize that video on this is what you do not do. So I think body cameras coupled with in-car cameras gives us a greater perspective of what went on the scene, and the officers know that we're going to be reviewing these cameras. So I think that may be a contributing factor to why some of the complaints went down.
Thank you, Chief. I know some people have asked about, again, what are the types of complaints that citizens have registered in 2020. Sergeant Warnick, before this, provided a list to me. Unprofessional conduct was one.
That was for the complaint register, sir.
That was these are the complaint registers. Okay, so these are. So go ahead, share this data then, if you would, Officer. Sergeant.
Sure. So far through 2020, we have one complaint register, and that came in and was done as a formal investigation. That's still pending, so the results will end up going to the CPRC and to HSC next meeting or two. As far as departmental inquiries, we've had 10 total. We've got 5 that are pending right now. We had 4 that were improper service, 5 unprofessional conduct, and 1 that was bias-based harassment.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Carolyn asked a question. Are complaints analyzed to identify patterns? If so, is this information shared with the City Council?
Well, we have a new system here, Benchmark, which is a program that helps us do that. And we look at patterns for training purposes, and also in terms of what may be considered a policy failure. If we see in the same pattern of incidents with multiple officers, it could be the organizational culture, it could be policy inequities and things of that nature. So this benchmark system gets all of this information into one program. It's an analytical program, and it paints a picture of early warnings and things of that nature that we may not necessarily see, but this program can forecast what may be on the horizon for a particular officer.
Okay. Is it true, this is also from Karen, is it true that anonymous complaints are investigated by the first line supervisor closest to the officer?
As far as it depends where, if someone calls the Office of Professional Standards and leaves a voicemail or talks to us and says they don't want to leave any of their information, we'll still investigate it, and it does go down to the first line supervisor. All complaints go down to the first line supervisor for review and investigation. That's how the process works. And like I stated before, it goes up to the commander and up to the deputy chief, and the chief has the final say. And just to clarify too, the Office of Professional Standards does not make any recommendations for discipline. We just do a unbiased investigation. So we compile the facts and we send the facts down to the supervisor to review and then decide if a rule violation was met. and then they tag on discipline, and then it goes up. And the discipline could get changed at each level. You know, a commander or deputy chief might say that it's just too much or not enough, which we've seen both, and the chief could agree or disagree with that and add or subtract.
Okay. Hey, Matt, can you go share with everyone the fourth recommendation, which I think there were 4 total recommendations out of the committee?
There were. The final recommendation was to create a police auditor position. I think one of the overall themes of the recommendation of the committee is to have more civilian oversight and civilian involvement in police policy. So the auditor would be a civilian position that would audit the investigation, audit the discipline, have primary access to the investigation, could potentially guide the investigation, and finally, this came up in the last comment, make policy recommendations, would be able to look at patterns and make policy recommendations to the chief to implement. And that has not been undertaken yet.
Hasn't been adopted yet. And so this person would, it sounded for me, and it's been a while since I read the report, which I did, is that this person sits between sort of the police investigation and then the Citizen Police Review Commission.
And HSC, they would be an independent auditor of the process. Like very similar to like an inspector general position you see in a lot of city government.
So can you share with us, Matt, when you went out there as part of your role as a committee and you looked at different cities and different models that were out there, why did you settle on sort of this one for Evanston as opposed to, because I still to this day have people coming and saying, oh, Mayor, there needs to be a completely separate, independent, authority with the right, to subpoena and investigate and all of that, which I do think of that as very Inspector General-like. But
sure,
the committee didn't recommend that, and so
it's an expensive process, and it's duplicative because the police are already investigating the misconduct. So there is a model that has a separate investigation, and generally the police under those models and in Illinois have to comply. It's part of the POTA, and then they make, and this is where it's different. And in Chicago, you see this where there's a police board that administers discipline that can be separate from the police chief. It's a more expensive model, and the problems that we saw in Evanston weren't egregious enough to warrant those resources. I would also say that this whole process never precludes a criminal investigation into police misconduct. That if there's egregious police misconduct, most likely the police officer is going to get fired, through this process. But that doesn't preclude an outside criminal investigation into that behavior.
Thank you for mentioning that, Matt. I think that's important for people to be aware of. I know we're running up on our hour, so I want to make sure just a couple real quick rapid responses to some questions here that I'll pick up, and in a future one we'll try and get some of these other questions answered. Does the EPD, this is from Austin, does the EPD consider pointing or drawing a gun a, quote, use of force incident, Chief?
Could be if you're menacing somebody with your gun. I don't expect a police officer to be out menacing the public with a weapon. So, when we review body camera information or in-car camera information, we're able to determine that right off the bat, whether or not an officer had a legitimate reason to have his weapon drawn or pointed at somebody.
But if he had his weapon drawn, that's not instantly regarded as a use of force, even though it wasn't, fired.
No, that's not necessarily force.
Oh, okay.
But menacing a weapon at somebody could be an infraction if they're doing it for improper reasons or no reason at all, or a reason that there were other alternatives that he could have utilized to gain the same results.
Right, which gets to the whole continuum of force. Right.
Yes.
How many times in the last 3 years, if you know this, how many times in the last 3 years has EPD found a use of force to be unjustified?
We haven't had any in the last 3 years, Mayor.
Not in the last 3 years. What about somebody drawing their weapon and, menacing somebody like the chief just said?
We've not had any complaints from citizens of that that we've reviewed.
Okay.
But we have noticed one in a video.
Okay. All right. All right. And disciplinary action was taken in that instance, chief, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. All right. There was a question that we had that came in just before this discussion. Can you describe the ways in which the new commission will be more transparent and more responsive to our Black and Brown communities than the previous CPAC? Let me just specifically, then that's sort of a statement, I guess. Specifically, will there be more than letter of the law notice of meetings so that we may be aware of the agenda and time and date of the virtual meetings? I think this is getting to a point Matt made at the beginning when the committee looked at the CPAC meetings and felt like there wasn't much information put out there to the public. It was pretty mysterious what the complaints were. In terms of being more responsive to our Black and Brown communities, I'll just say that I think the Citizen Police Review Commission is an essential and important committee in making sure that we are not mistreating anyone in this community, but particularly those that are policed more than others, which can be people in Brown and Black communities. I thought it was important, took some criticism for this, but important that committee be comprised of many people who live in areas that are policed more than other areas. So this is a really, I think, diverse group of people that we've put together here with a wide range of life experiences on that committee. So that's, I always think that, people in power and people in positions need to reflect, our community. And I think we've done that with this Citizen Police Review Commission, and we're doing it with other boards and commissions that we have here. Will discussions of any video viewed in closed session be limited to the open public meeting? So can you talk, so maybe just if you can walk our viewers through so we can understand when they are seeing body worn camera video or camera video from the automobiles, is that are they in public, the Citizen Police Review Commission, when they're viewing that, or is that an executive session? How's that all work?
It goes in a closed session.
That goes into closed session.
Yeah. Which it follows Opens Meeting Act standards. So this regular citizen, if you're come and watch the meeting, you have to leave, or they've retired somewhere else to watch the video.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. Matt, did you want to add something there?
I just think it properly meets the personnel exception to the Open Meetings Act. And so that's why the committee goes into closed session to view the video.
Thank you. The oversight, this is from Austin, the oversight agency in Chicago has a case portal online that provides all the relevant information about complaints, body camera footage, incident reports. Would the city be willing to provide such a portal in Evanston?
Well, the city of Chicago is under a consent decree. Evanston, you all financed a study, the Hilliard Heights study, that said Evanston Police Department had an industry standard investigative process when it came to reviewing complaints. And that study was concluded in 2018. So Evanston has had a history of being on par with how these investigations should take place. Now, being transparent, I'm 100% for. We live in the era of citizen oversight. I never resist citizen oversight, but we got to do that with respect to the rights of the police officer. We got to do that with respect to the rights of victims. A lot of people that file these complaints don't want people to know about it. So we have to really be careful on how we go about putting their information out. We have a dashboard online that we could add some things on recommendation from the city council that they think we should put out, and if that's the way it goes, that's what we'll put out. But just throwing the whole pot out there without really being considerate of what is pertinent to transparency and versus what we have to do to protect information for court, for litigation, whether it's a tort or whether it's a criminal investigation, is something that we need to really consider.
Thank you, Chief. Matt?
I think there's legitimate privacy concerns regarding making all the body camera video public. Where I disagree with the chief is I think that Evanston should strive to far exceed the industry standard. If the industry standard is policing in America, I think the Evanston Police Department can do a whole lot better.
Well, when I say that, Matt, you know that our process was far and beyond what was acceptable in law enforcement in terms of investigation, in terms of the level of discipline, in terms of the different categories of discipline that we investigate. We far exceeded what most police departments did, and maybe I should say that in terms of we've exceeded industry standards, and that's true.
Thank you, Chief, and thank you, Matt. I think we continue to be a work in progress here in Evanston. I'm pleased that we've got a police chief and an entire department that's always looking to improve in whatever the area is. We'll continue to do that. Matt, thank you so much for your leadership on the as chair of the Citizen Police Complaint Assessment Committee with the other 8 community members who all participated in that. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today. Thank Patrick Degnan for his behind-the-scenes work. And we may be bringing a couple more in this series, and we'll put those topics out in the next week, and the dates and when they will be as well. I appreciate everybody's time in developing an understanding of how our police department here in Evanston works. Be well, everyone, and we'll see you at the next in this series.